أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا أقسم بهذا البلد وأنت حل بهذا البلد ووالد وما ولد لقد خلقنا الإنسان في كبد أيحسب أن لن يقدر عليه أحد يقول أهلكت مالا لبدا أيحسب أن لم يره أحد ألم نجعل له عينين ولسانا وشفتين وهديناه النجدين فلاقتحم العقبة وما أدراك ما العقبة فك رقبة أو إطعام في يوم ذي مسغبة يتيم ذا مقربة أو مسكين ذا متربة ثم كان من الذين آمنوا وتواصوا بالصبر وتواصوا بالمرحمة أولئك أصحاب الميمنة والذين كفروا بآياتنا هم أصحاب المشأمة عليهم نار مؤصدة صدق الله العلي العظيم.
پر محمد وآل بیت محمد صلوات. عاشور کی شب ہائے سکینہ کا وہ رونا اور سید مظلوم کا بیٹی سے یہ کہنا ارے تو روئے میں یہ دیکھ نہیں سکتا سکینہ اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی پہلو میں کبھی ماں کے بھی سو یا کرو بی بی اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی کیا ہو کسی شب کو جو ہم گھر میں نہ آئے تم ہم کو نہ پاؤ تمہیں ہم بھی نہیں پائے تڑپو گی نہیں درد سے وعدہ کرو بی بی پہلو میں کبھی ماں کے بھی سو یا کرو بی بی اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی بیٹھا کرو کچھ دیر چراغوں کو بجھا کر سمجھا کرو اس خاک کو اے لاڈلی بستر بالی کبھی یوں ہی نہیں پہنا کرو بی بی، پہلو میں کبھی ماں کے بھی سو یا کرو بی بی، اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی، کچھ دیر کو یہ فرض کرو ہم نہ رہے گر، باقی نہ رہے ہاتھ کوئی رکھنے کو سر پر، ماحول یتیموں کا بھی سوچا کرو بی بی، پہلو میں کبھی ماں کے بھی سو یا کرو بی بی، اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی، عادت ذرا تنہائی میں رہنے کی بھی ڈالو، تصویر تصور میں اسیری کی بنا لو، آزاد پرندوں کو نہ دیکھا کرو بی بی، پہلو میں کبھی ماں کے بھی سو یا کرو بی بی، اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی، اصغر کو نہ مانوس کرو پیار سے اپنے، اکبر کی عروسی کے نہ دے کا کرو سپنے، صغرا کے قریب نانا بیٹا کرو بی بی، پہلو میں کبھی ماں کے بھی سو یا کرو بی بی، اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی، زندان سے ریحان صدا آتی ہے اکثر، جیسے کہ سکینہ سے یہ فرماتے ہو سرور، اب ڈر سے لعینوں کے نہ جاگا کرو بی بی، پہلو میں کبھی ماں کے بھی سو یا کرو بی بی، اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی، عادت ذرا تنہائی میں رہنے کی بھی ڈالو، تصویر تصور میں یتیمی کی بنا لو، آزاد پرندوں کو نہ دیکھا کرو بی بی، پہلو میں کبھی ماں کے بھی سو یا کرو بی بی، اچھی نہیں یہ بات نہ رویا کرو بی بی، نہ رویا کرو بی بی، پر محمد والے بیت محمد صلوات۔
پر محمد وآل محمد صلوات. آج بھی زینب کی آتی ہے صدا بھائی حسین. آج بھی زینب کی آتی ہے صدا بھائی حسین. تیرا چہرہ تیری آنکھیں بھول کب پائی حسین. آج بھی زینب کی آتی ہے صدا بھائی حسین. چلتے ناکے سے گرایا خود کو جلتی ریت پر. چلتے ناکے سے گرایا خود کو جلتی ریت پہ. گھٹنیوں کے بل میں تیری لاش تک آئی حسین. بس میں گھبرائی تھی خنجر تجھ پہ چلتا دیکھ کر. بس میں گھبرائی تھی خنجر تجھ پہ چلتا دیکھ کر. پھر کسی مشکل میں گر کر میں نہ گھبرائی حسین. کون تھا جو مرنے والوں میں نہیں تھا خوبرو. کون تھا جو مرنے والوں میں نہیں تھا خوبرو. بھولنے بیٹھی تو کس کس کی نہ یاد آئی حسین. بہہ رہے تھے آنکھ سے آنسو کا آنکھیں پتھرائی حسین دور افتادہ سفر سے لوٹ کر میں نے نوید دور افتادہ سفر سے لوٹ کر میں نے نوید ٹھنڈا پانی جب پیا بس تیری یاد آئی حسین تیرا چہرہ تیری آنکھیں بھول کب پائی حسین آج بھی زینب کی آتی ہے صدا بھائی حسین سورۃ المبارکۃ الفاتحہ
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can we please recite Surah Al-Fatiha for the names displayed on the screens and for all marhumeen, please. Surah Al-Mubarakat Al-Fatiha. Dua Shafaat requested for Bashir Ahmed Raza and for all Mareed, please. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 اللهم صل على محمد وآل Muhammad. Tomorrow the program begins at 7:15 p.m. with Quran and Marcia, Majlis at 7:35 p.m. ending with Matam and Salah. If you would like to sponsor a Majlis for your marhumeen, please contact Zaida by Asharia for the ladies or go to either desk. There is a request to kindly donate £150 per family towards the Muharram funds. Membership is now due for renewal. Please renew at either desk. There was also a census which has been requested by the World Federation. Inshallah, this will take place on the 9th night. Please fill this in on entry. Please can you also follow the instructions of the parking volunteers at all times. The Muharram exhibition is now open. Please refer to the WhatsApp message for further details. And Salatul Jama'at will also be held in the marquee if there is no space in the gents hall. Also, brothers and sisters, could we please request you to all settle down quickly after Salah so that the volunteers can start to serve the tea and tabarruk. We need to wait until everyone is seated before we can start serving. Sisters, you will be served in the mothers and toddlers room. Brothers, before we begin the majlis, there is a request to please stand up and come as close to the front as possible. We want to avoid as many disruptions during the lecture as possible. At the same time, let's welcome Sheikh Mohammed al-Hilli with the last salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Brothers at the back, please come close to the front. The youth and the kids, please do not sit on the walls as well. Leave that for the elderly. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before I start the majlis tonight or this evening, a number of the mu'mineen have asked for clarification on a story that I mentioned a few nights ago regarding Amir al-Mu'mineen's forgiveness. And for those who are not there, the story was regarding the lady who got married to somebody else because her husband went missing. And so some people say, how is this possible? That did Amir al-Mu'mineen go against Islamic law? No, of course not. What actually happened, and I did not mention, was that there was a rumor that he was killed. So she immediately acted upon that rumor and did not investigate and rushed towards the marriage. And as a result, this particular marriage of hers was not necessarily founded on the right foundation, and hence Amir al-Mu'mineen was able to say that she needs to go back to her husband, original husband. So that's the clarification that some of the mu'mineen have requested. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله والحمد حقه كما يستحقه حمدا كثيرا. وأعوذ به من شر نفسي إن النفس لأمارة بالسوء إلا ما رحم ربي. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الخلق وخاتم الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين سيدنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المطهرين المكرمين. السلام عليك سيدي ومولاي يا أبا عبد الله، وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. صلوات. قال الله العظيم في كتابه الكريم وهو أحسن القائلين وأصدق الصادقين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب والأزلام رجس من عمل الشيطان فاجتنبوه لعلكم تفلحون. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the purification of the souls, the enlightening of the hearts, for the acceptance of the deeds, and for the hastening of the reappearance of the awaited Savior, Ajralallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif, enlighten your souls and the atmosphere with the recitation of salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This is a game that is played by millions of human beings across the world. It has been prohibited by many Muslim scholars due to its link to gambling. Yet today it's a subject of discussion amongst the youth who are using it to question their association with taqleed and marja'iyya. Chess is a game that is played across many different countries around the world today and across history. We recognize it's a game that involves two players who often seek to win through the causation of the checkmate of the king of the other person's side, and in the recognition that it involves the engagement for a particular period of time. This game originated in India and then developed in Persia. But the oldest today manuscript or its link is towards an Arab. This particular individual by the name of al-Adli al-Rumi in the year 840 AD is the author of the book by the name of Kitab al-Shatranj, and he is the oldest that we have of the references that details the game of chess. When we come to this particular game, the recognition that many people recognize within the religion of Islam is that Sunni and Shia jurists, many of them have come forward and said it's a game that is prohibited. It's a game that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made haram. But at the same time, we have some who have now questioned this and have now begun to discuss why this is the case. In the idea, because it's a game of chance, some have said that this game cannot be somehow accepted within the religion of Islam. As a result of the ayat in the Quran and the hadith from the Holy Prophet and the Ahl al-Bayt alayhum as-salam, this deduction has been made by many jurists. And as an extension, other games that are related to qimar or the games of chance or gambling, like for example dominoes, backgammon, poker, or indeed roulette and others, have also been grouped under the same category. Today, personally, I have received tens of emails, messages and comments from many of the sisters and brothers residing mainly in the Western world. Their argument is this: chess is no longer a game of gambling. It's no longer a game of chance. It's now used to enhance cognitive development. It's used to develop our own ability to strategize. It's used for the strengthening of the brain. And therefore, they find it frustrating and difficult to accept that Islamic law till now says that chess is haram. And hence, therefore, some have begun to oppose the rulings in this particular regard. They say, we have always been told from the minbar and the madrasa that everything in Islam makes sense. There is logic within the teachings of the religion of Islam. What is the logic behind chess being made forbidden when I innocently play with my friend without involving any gambling or placing any money? To add to the discussion, many of the jurists within the school of Ahl al-Bayt who have said that the playing of chess is haram, like Ayatollah Khoi, Ayatollah Sistani, Ayatollah Wahid Khurasani, Ayatollah Ishaq Fayyad, Ayatollah Sadiq Shirazi, and many of the maraji' who have said that it's haram. They have said even playing it online electronically is forbidden too. In other words, that when an individual plays with a computer, they have not even allowed this. And these maraji' have placed a definitive fatwa, a categorical answer, which does not involve the option to refer to other maraji', because they seem absolutely determined and clear in their recognition of chess being a game of gambling, a game that is not permissible within the religion of Islam. Today, however, what has this led to is the confusion amongst the youth by asking the following questions. Do we not see gambling in other games? And why is it that, for example, certain games are allowed and chess isn't? I have heard questions and seen questions that people say, for example, is playing snakes and ladders allowed? Yes. Is playing some games involving dice allowed? Yes. Is playing games that involve others gambling on it allowed? Like, for example, football or tennis or any other sport that involves others gambling. Is it permissible? Yes. They say, how is this permissible? And the games such as chess or dominoes or roulette or these kinds of games are made haram. This has been a subject of discussion and contention in the minds of many individuals, and has been also utilized by people disguised in the form of following Shia Islam to attack marja'iyya, maraja', ulama system of ijtihad. There are no doubt today people who will come to you and say, I am from the followers of Ahl al-Bayt and I follow the Ahl al-Bayt and I am an individual who subscribes to the teachings of Ahl al-Bayt. Yet they will be an individual who attacks marja'iyya more than a non-Muslim by far, or more than a Wahhabi by far. In other words, they will probably get the certificate for the international highest rate of attack on maraja' per year, more than any other individual, because they have a particular agenda. One of the things they will utilize is chess. They say, listen, you are right, oh young man or woman, you should be questioning this. How is this logical? And therefore it's used to look at a number of other rulings that fuqaha and ulama and maraja' and importantly a mujtahid has brought forward. For example, the whole subject of azadari. They will come to you and say, listen, this ruling and that ruling. Look at this marja' and that marja'. And they will utilize the subject of these games to inflame the discussion and the dissension within the followers of Ahl al-Bayt on why maraja' differ. How is it possible? If they're all following the path of Allah, why do we have marja' X who has a particular ruling regarding moon sighting, and marja' Y has a different ruling when it comes to sighting of the moon and the starting of the new Hijrah month? They will say, what is wrong today with maraja'? Why are they not allowing, for example, the usage of cannabis? I remember in Chicago, Ohio, in the United States, and a few other places, once I was having a debate or Q&A with some of the youth. One of them picked up his hands and says, I have a question. I said, yes. He said, as you know, here, we are now, in Chicago particularly, we are now able to buy cannabis from the street. There are shops now that sell the weed and so on. So when will it be time that Islam will allow it to? SubhanAllah. You can buy alcohol from the shopping. Why didn't Islam allow it too? In the recognition that just because we live in societies that have decriminalized the usage of certain drugs, certain people expect Islam to somehow follow suit. Since when does Islam follow law that is made by human beings? In the recognition that this is a very sensitive, delicate, but at the same time difficult subject. A subject that needs to be discussed using the example of chess. In which angle? Imagine you and I are in the mind of a marja' or particularly a mujtahid. Meaning, how does this scholar make a decision regarding what something is halal or haram? What goes through the mind of a faqih, of a mujtahid, in order to issue a fatwa? Because sometimes when we come to something, or when there is some kind of Chinese whispers that goes around or misconception, it circulates amongst people without necessarily understanding the reasons. Many a times misconceptions are like this. People can say all kinds of things, but do they dig deeper to find the answer or not? It's very easy today to sit at home in London or in Washington or in Dar es Salaam or in Switzerland or anywhere else and say this marja' is sitting in Najaf, this marja' is sitting in Qom, not connected to our world, doesn't know what's going on. The Islamic law is archaic, it's following 1400 years, it's not in line with the current movement and thinking. Let's have renewed forms of ijtihad and so on and so forth. This is very easy to come up with and to say, isn't it? And if it's made based on understanding of the process, very well. Academically, there's a scope for discussion. But if it's made by, with all respect, lay individuals like myself or some of the mu'mineen and mu'minat who are not mujtahids, who are not experts in the field, and all of a sudden, overnight they get a PhD in what? In attacking maraja'. All of a sudden, I have now the green light. Criticize, laugh, mock, make fun of a particular scholar who spent all his life to deduce a ruling that he feels is the best in his capability. And he is responsible before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in doing so. Therefore, sometimes what we need to do is dig deeper and indeed investigate the cause of what we think. And how did we come about with this kind of deduction in a world that is easy to spread ideas that become cemented and become part and parcel of our thinking and indeed mindset. For example, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless the mu'mineen when they perform the ma'tam. What a great demonstration of love and loyalty. This ma'tam and the striking of the chest and the recitation of the noha is something that is truly a demonstration, one of the means of aza towards Sayyid Shuhada, Aba Abdullah al-Hussain salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. But one thing that we have to remind ourselves is sometimes what we recite when we beat our chests may not necessarily be the correct thing. For example, if we come forward and say Hayya ala khayr al-amal regarding aza and ma'tam, this is not acceptable. Why? Because Hayya ala khayr al-amal is only reserved to salah. Do you agree? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it as part of adhan. And I ask you, certain individuals removed it from adhan. We are defenders of Hayya ala khayr al-amal relating to salah. And the adhan of other Muslims is not there, isn't it? But for you and I, we must be individuals who recognize that there is no doubt about the importance of aza, crying, shedding, the rituals of Hussein. Yes? But when it comes to salah, salah is salah. And salah is the best deed. And therefore we must not use phrases used for salah in order to explain anything else that other than salah. Sometimes some of these things are needed for us to be reminded about the importance of certain things. And therefore, I would like to, in a difficult discussion that requires your patience and attention, to go through the mind of a faqih, a jurist, when it comes to chess. How do they come to the conclusion that they come to the conclusion? By looking at a number of questions. Number one, the process of istinbat, the extrapolation of law. How does it work? What does a faqih or a mujtahid do? Number two, is Islamic law stagnant or is it moving with the times? Number three, chess. Why are there ulama and fuqaha today who are very strong in their position regarding chess? What is their argument? Number four, there are very few maraja who have said chess is permissible. What's their point of view so that we can have a balanced discussion? Number five, when it comes to Islamic rulings, fiqh, ahkam, is there a role for the intellect? Can the aql give us what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you and I? And number six, how does Karbala summarize the whole subject of obedience and submission to Allah, following in the footsteps of Sayyid al-Shuhada, Aba Abdullah al-Hussain, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Eating rabbit food is haram. Tattoos is halal with certain restrictions. When it comes to, for example, visiting one's family, it is considered mustahab. These rulings are all found where? They're found in a book known as the Collection of the Rulings, Rasailul Amaliyya, of a particular Mujtahid. A Mujtahid is who? An individual who takes part in the process of ijtihad. Ijtihad means what? It means that somebody who goes through juhud. Juhud means struggle. They go through a very rigorous process in order to give you and I what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do as far as the ahkam, the do's and the don'ts, the jurisprudence, and what He subhanahu wa ta'ala would reward us for, and indeed if we do not do it, what He would punish us for. What ijtihad essentially is intellectual exertion, intellectual deduction, and it involves looking at the sources, in order to extrapolate law. What are the main sources in which the maraji' use to derive law? Number one, the Holy Quran. Number two, hadith of the Holy Prophet and the Ahl al-Bayt. Number three, intellect. Number four, consensus, ijma' that leads towards the opinion of the ma'soom. This is the four important tools or sources by which a mujtahid utilizes when it comes to what? When it comes to deriving law. Now, let's look at, for example, chess. Here, there is a mujtahid, because not every mujtahid is a marja', but every marja' is a mujtahid. What's the difference? A mujtahid is usually somebody who has the title Ayatullah, meaning they don't follow anyone. They have derived laws, but they have not declared their marja'iyya, meaning they have not published their works and their rulings and their fatwas in order for some reason, and therefore people don't usually follow them. But a marja' is normally an individual whom people follow through taqleed. When a mujtahid comes and wants to derive a law relating to chess, is chess halal or haram? Let's go through the process. Let's this evening think about the steps that he would indeed undertake. The first thing he would look at is the Holy Quran, no doubt. Are there verses in the Quran that say chess is halal or chess is haram? Of course. When we look at the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in chapter 5, verse number 90, talks about the main ayah discussed regarding this. Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, innamal khamru wal maysir wal ansab. Oh, you who believe, verily, surely, wine, drinks of intoxication, and maysir here refers to gambling, and what? And ansab here in relation to idols or things that are using idols. And Islam is a game that used to play using certain arrows and straws and whatever. رِجْسٌ مِّنْ عَمَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. This is abomination from the actions of shaitan, therefore stay away from it. Now, a faqih, a jurist, will have studied a number of important sciences. They would have studied Arabic language, morphology. They would have studied logic. They would have studied usul al-fiqh, the principles of jurisprudence. They would have studied tafsir. They would have been equipped with history. Would have been equipped with essential sciences that are necessary to understand the texts. And therefore they would come and deduce from this ayah of the Quran very briefly, and this is a very quick summary because this involves sometimes months and years. They would deduce from fajtanibuh, meaning stay away from it. There is no other way. It doesn't mean makruh, because Islamic laws can be one of five, isn't it? Either it's wajib, or it's haram, or it's mustahab, or makruh, or mubah. Either it's obligatory or something that is prohibited, or there's something that's recommended, something not recommended, or something that's just allowed, like drinking water, for example. They come to say, okay, out of these five, this chess from this ayah, what does it refer to? Does it refer to something that's prohibited? Fajtanibu. This ijtinab means what? They go back to the Arabic language, they go back to hadith, and then they come with the conclusion. Now, you might say to me, this maysir, how do we know this refers to chess? Here comes this massive field relating to hadith sciences, dirayatul hadith. They must be now equipped to be able to go through this incredibly painstaking journey to establish whether hadith are reliable or not, and what kind of tools must they use. When they come to the world of hadith, there are ample. For example, in Wasa'il al-Shi'a from Abu Basir, from Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. From Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he was asked what is maysir, he says, ash-shatranj wa-nard huma al-maysir. Chess and backgammon, this game, are what the Quran is talking about when it comes to what? Maysir. Therefore, they look at this particular hadith, and then can there be other hadiths that are contradictory to it, or are there hadiths that support it? When they go through their own criteria of verifying the hadith, they have to know what's known as the science of the authentication of the narrators, ilm al-rijal. the narrators of these hadith, are they reliable? Then they go back either to their own tools or they use the tools of other established scholars like Ayatollah Khu'i rahmatullahi alayhi. He has, for example, Mu'jam Rijal al-Hadith, encyclopedia of the narrators of hadith. They may refer to Ayatollah Khu'i's Mabani, principles or basis, or they may have their own on whether they should verify a narrator of the hadith or not. Then they come, for example, to this hadith, Wasa'il al-Shia, volume 12. Many of our maraji' have said this is Sahih hadith. It's called Sahihat Zurara. Zurara is a great companion from the Holy Six Imam. أنه سئل عن الشطرنج. He was asked. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam was asked about shatranj. Is it allowed? He replies, I ask you, he says, إذا ميز الله الحق والباطل مع أيهما يكون. If Allah was to say there's the truth and there is the falsehood, chess, whom do you think does it fall under? Imam asks the asker. He wants the person asking to ponder. The person says, I think مع الباطل, with the false. Imam says, قال لا خير فيه. There is no goodness in it. There's nothing that you should therefore seek in it. Here, the faqih comes and looks at this and says, this is a sahih narration. Imam alayhi salam does not respond to the individual and say, no, it's not with batil. It has good uses. It may be utilized for the aql, for the brain development. Imam doesn't say anything like this. He says there is no benefit in it. There is no goodness in it. So, based on this and so many other narrations, they come to one particular stage of their deduction. Now, is this it? Is this how they're going to make the conclusion? No. They have to look at a number of other things. Please understand so that you know how difficult it is for a faqih or a jurist to come with a ruling. Sometimes we take these lightly. I've seen these clips on social media whereby people take the roles of others in order to understand that sometimes when we don't necessarily do what others do, we neglect and take their actions lightly. I saw one clip whereby a wife who was pregnant said to her husband, I want you for a whole day to walk around with what? With a watermelon in your stomach and see whether you can function. And she filmed him doing that. So he had a big watermelon. He placed it under his shirt. And every time he wants to pick up something, he can't. He found it very heavy to walk. Then he appreciated how difficult it was for his wife during the years of pregnancy, isn't it? Sometimes it's very easy to criticize or to belittle the actions of others when we're not ourselves in their position and think, oh, what are they doing? Once somebody came to me and said, I don't understand this ruling that the marja' has. I said, what is this ruling? Said, I'm against it. With one of the ladies. She messaged me on Facebook. I said, what's the ruling? She said, this marja' is saying that if someone, a male, wants to marry a female, he is allowed to look at her without hijab. I don't agree with this. I said, why? He said, did the marja' have his Weetabix that morning? What do you mean? I said, maybe he woke up on the wrong side of bed. Maybe he didn't think properly. How can a non-mahram look at the mahram? This is not right. Ajib. Now we're becoming pseudo maraja, in the position to argue with a marja. That's where the problem lies. And that's why when I put myself in the mindset or how a marja works, I can appreciate. Now, what does the marja do here, or a faqih? What do? They've studied the hadith, they've looked at the Quran, but it doesn't end there. They have to then analyze the context. Meaning what? They have to see whether, even if the hadith is sahih, whether it was said in taqiyya, dissimulation or not. They have to then also study whether it's literal or not, whether it's general or very specific, whether it's conditional or unconditional. All these must be looked at because hadith literature is filled with situations in which things shouldn't be necessarily taken at the surface level. Now, Ayatollah Sistani Hafidhullah is amongst a number of jurists who has even more strict conditions in acceptance of hadith. He has 7 other conditions when he comes to certain narrations, when it comes to Islamic jurisprudence. I'd like to share 3 with you so that you can appreciate when some rulings you don't like, you know the rigorous actions that took place in order for this ruling to be attained. One of them, he says, is I have to check the manuscript. What is the manuscript? He says sometimes the books that have been printed have erred when it comes to the narration. So I need to look, if possible, find the manuscript, and as a result check the hadith and whether it's been narrated properly. For example, he cites a few things. And in order for us to benefit more, let's come forward as much as possible, inshallah, and create some space for the mu'mineen coming later. Please come forward with the recitation of salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There's more space. If you can come forward more, you will get thawab, inshallah, more with the second salawat. A third salawat to display our love and loyalty to Sayyid al-Shuhada Aba Abdullah al-Hussain salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. His Eminence Ayatullah Sistani says the first thing I will check is manuscript. Why? He says there are riwayat today that are found in books of hadith that, for example, he gives an example. He says if you have recited a surah in salah and you've come to 2/3 of it, you've recited 2/3 of it, then if you decide to recite another surah, you can start another surah. He says these riwayat are there, but when I checked the manuscript, I found there's an error because it should be a third, not a 2/3. Therefore, this criteria he utilizes. The second is what? He says there is what is known as the rule of the application of probability. He shares this opinion with Ayatullah al-Uzma al-Shaheed al-Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayh. They both come forward and say what? They say when there is something repeated often, we have to group it and then calculate the probability of it coming from a ma'soom. And as a result, we can then take it and accept it. For example, he utilizes this in this really deep discussion that some have utilized or have exploited regarding whether the 12th Imam is born or not. The narrations relating to the birth of the Imam alayhi salam, some have questioned authenticity. Some have said this is weak, some da'if, mursal, it's the broken chain. But His Eminence says if you group the narrations and you come with this calculation regarding the probability of such an occurrence, you come with a sound conclusion. Similarly, he says there is a role for the time and place of a riwayah to be understood and applied generally. What do we mean? He says there are many narrations that highlight the importance of the ziyarah of Aba Abdullah in Karbala in Rajab and Sha'ban. But why? Why in Rajab and Sha'ban? He studies this extensively. He says if you look at the time and the occasion and the context by which these riwayat were presented by the Ahlul Bayt alayhum salam, it was a time whereby those months were something that people found relative ease to go. So the Ahlul Bayt encouraging them to go these months. But he says that as a result of this, we can then deduce that despite the few narrations and the challenge that some have about the authenticity of the narrations of Ziyaratul Arba'in, this can also apply to Ziyaratul Arba'in today. He says because if the Imams alayhum salam were alive today, the Imams that mentioned these hadiths, they would have said that go to perform the ziyarah of Aba Abdullah because of the demonstration that today Shi'as have presented, the strength of Ziyaratul Arba'in. Therefore, even despite some tools existing, some of the fuqaha come forward and look at other things. Now, when they look at this, then they can come to a conclusion. When they come to a conclusion, they either say, what? Something is concrete, fatwa, or they say it's based on precaution, ihtiyat. And there are two types of ihtiyat. One is known as ihtiyat wujubi, and one is known as ihtiyat istihbabi. I know tonight's discussion is technical, but trust me, you need this. And our youth are challenging this. If you and I are not able to understand how a faqih deduces Islamic law, we may struggle to have discussions with our children who may not accept, and some are leaving religion. Some are taking whatever they want from religion and turning a blind eye to anything that doesn't agree to their way of thinking. This idea of fatwa and ihtiyat, what does it mean? the jurist comes and says, one area that I'm absolutely sure, I will say it's a fatwa. There is no chance for any other opinion. Meaning what? I am certain this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to complete, for example. Yes? Or sometimes he says, no, I am not 100% certain because the evidence that I have is not conclusive enough, but it's near conclusive. Therefore, I would say ihtiyat wujubi means obligatory precaution. You should be following what I say, except if there's another jurist, marja', who is at least at the same level as me or higher in this regard, identified by an expert, not by the lay, or looking at its face and saying, mashallah, he's more beautiful. There are people today who say, you know what, I'm going to jump into this marja' because I like the way he says things. Ajib. You like the way he says things? Where does it say this is the criteria to follow a particular marja'? Or I like the way he presents that stuff on his book. Or I love his wakil. Or these are not the criteria to be following a particular jurist or a marja'. Yes? Now, for example, when it comes to having a beard for men, His Eminence, Ayatollah Sistani, Ayatollah Khoi, many of our fuqaha, they say it's obligatory precaution. They can't find absolute conclusive proof from Quran and Hadith and from ijma' of the ulama of the past that leads to the opinion of the ma'soom, or from the intellect, and we'll talk about the intellect in a minute, to say there is absolutely a fatwa on it. They say it's obligatory precaution. Similarly, today there is the ruling regarding cryptocurrency, Bitcoin and so on. His Eminence says what? Based on obligatory precaution, it should not be purchased or sold. That's his opinion, because he has not been able to come to a firm fatwa on this regard. Question: if the ruling is a fatwa, can I then choose to follow another marja' on this? No. I'm not able to, because the marja' is saying you don't need to. I am absolutely sure about this opinion. But if the opinion is obligatory precaution, there is a possibility, based on finding a person who is a people of expert, Ahlul Khibra, who will say Ayatollah X, for example, has expertise on this area, and based on my understanding as an expert, as a Mujtahid, I'm telling you, you can refer back to this marja' or this Mujtahid in this idea, but only on rulings that are obligatory precaution. And there are rulings that are on recommended precaution. That is just mustahab. It's not necessarily obligatory for people to follow. Now, based on this, the question that is indeed presented is what? Is when it comes to these ahadith, why do we find it like this? The Holy Prophet Rasul al-A'zam Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, beautiful hadith. Remember this, the next time you see hadiths that do not make sense, he says, Inna hadithu ala Muhammad sa'bun mustas'ab. The hadiths from the Ahl al-Bayt are difficult and quite challenging. La yu'minu bihi. Those who believe in the hadith of the Ahl al-Bayt are only the following: Illa malakun muqarrab, except an angel who's close to Allah, or nabiyyun mursal, or a prophet that has been sent by Allah, or abdun imtahana Allahu qalbahu lil iman, or a servant that Allah has tested their hearts and they have been successful. Too many people are rejecting. Oh no, Maulana, but I came across this hadith. Where did you find it? I found it in this book. What's it called? It's called Facebook version 2.0. You found a hadith in Facebook and you're debating the maraji' and the ulama? So the recognition is, if there is a hadith that you come across that doesn't sit with your mind, that is specifically related to jurisprudence. My area today is jurisprudence. I'm not talking about the hadith that are presented regarding history, akhlaq, spirituality. Those have its own separate discussions. Because taqleed, when it comes to aqaid, does not exist per se. However, I'm talking about ahkam. But Maulana, I have seen a hadith that says when you come to recite the Quran, you should be covering your head. So, do I have to be wearing hijab when reciting the Quran? But you've seen the hadith yourself. Where did you see the hadith? And when I was blessed to go to Hajj, the number one question that I received whilst I was in Medina and Mecca from Shia is what? am I allowed to shave my head when during the first 10 days of the Hajj or go to the barbers? Not in Hajj. I'm sitting in London. They say, and I wondered what's going on. It turns out there is a hadith that is not rated in the school of al-Bayt by our brothers that says in the first 10 days of the Hajj, don't cut your hair. And everyone's panicking. And the barbers are losing business. So the recognition is what? The recognition is be careful to deduce your own laws from hadith. Hadith has a deep science behind it. When you look at hadith and you come to your own conclusion, this is a huge responsibility. It's not your job, neither it's mine. Please bear that in mind. Question: is Islamic law today stagnant or is it moving? Please understand this, because this is also a contemporary challenge. When it comes to rulings, do rulings change or are they somehow stagnate? The question here is related to the ability for people, as well as before that the faqih, to look at situations and to give a different ruling. And this exists. Why? Because we have what's known as the primary ruling, hukm al-awwali, and we have the secondary consideration. This you need to understand. It's heavy, but you must understand. What does this mean? Today, for example, we have a ruling that says marriage is what? What is it? Wajib? Mustahab. Alhamdulillah, no one here said it's haram. Says marriage is mustahab. Do you agree? It's recommended. Yes? Now, this is what's known as hukm al-awwali. It's the primary ruling. Sometimes for certain people, marriage becomes wajib. Now it changes only for certain individuals. This is because of the secondary consideration. Hukm al-thanawi. Wudu today is something that should be performed before salah. But for certain individuals, because wudu is harmful, it turns into tayammum. So there is also this scope. Now you ask me, when does this happen? I'll tell you 4 situations in which a ruling can change based on certain considerations. The first is what? When there is iftirar, desperation. Somebody is in the desert. They have no water except wine. You know, these examples are given. I don't know if they ever existed. But it has to be there hypothetically. Maybe one day they're traveling and they have no water, but somebody come and gives them wine. They're desperate. They're about to die. Yes. Iftirar, they need to drink. They're allowed to drink whatever it takes to keep them alive. Not to say, mashallah, bismillah, drink the whole thing. Only what they need in order to keep alive. That now has become a secondary consideration. Yes, the ruling has changed. Wine drinking is haram. But in that instance, it becomes wajib on them to save their lives. Not even only halal. It comes wajib to drink that alcohol just for saving of one's life. Number 2, dharar. Dharar means what? Harm. Sometimes there are certain things if we do, it harms us. As we said, for example, I cannot have water in my body. Now I have to do ghusl. What do? Tayammum. Now this ruling changes. Now it goes into the secondary consideration. Third, haraj. Haraj means what? Haraj means unbearable hardship. Something that cannot be withstood by certain individuals, and therefore based on that ruling can change. For example, abortion. His Eminence Ayatollah Sistani has the ruling that if the soul has not been blown into the fetus before 4 months, and there is unbearable hardship on the mother to have the child, then she can abort the child. Not after 4 months. No excuse, even if there is danger to her life or the life of the child. But before the 4 months, yes, because of the dharar. Similarly, what? We have the idea of taqiyya. Usually, the imam of a Salatul Jama'ah must be Ithna Ashari. But our fuqaha today have said you can pray behind someone who's not Ithna Ashari. Many have said this with the niyyah of Jama'ah. Why? Because there is a secondary consideration relating to what? Taqiyya. Hence, this is one area today whereby Islamic law is not as stagnant and rigid as you and I may think. Similarly, today there are many fuqaha who are looking at these rulings once again based on considerations of makan and zaman, time and the place by which they were revealed. You tell me, give me an example, please. I need an example. Did you know that we have hadith, many, which says selling and giving blood is haram? The problem is we're living in London. We think everything is cozy. These Maraji had to deal with these challenges. Now, you might come to me and say, how did the Maraji, these Mujtahids deal with it? Do you know how they dealt with it? They've looked at the situation regarding the time and the place. At that time, these riwayat was because there was no value for blood, because it couldn't be stored. And therefore, they were there because it had no significance. And so therefore, that's the conclusion that they come with. Now they've said, no such thing. It's good to give blood. It's no problem to sell blood because it's needed to save life. Similarly, another area in which Islamic jurisprudence is moving, and this is another discussion, I'm just going to touch on it, is what's known as hukm al-wila'i. Hukm al-wila'i means what? It means governance, rulings. That our fuqaha have discussed that when an individual is in the position of governance, they have jurisdiction to be able to rule based on the overall goodness and the well-being for the subjects, for the community. And sometimes decisions have to be made in that particular regard. But that's a discussion that's indeed being discussed. Now, when we come to chess, why is it that today the vast majority of our fuqaha are of the opinion that it is forbidden? What is the reason behind this? The first thing that they say is that chess, the existence of narrations are overwhelming. In Wasa'il al-Shia, there is an entire chapter on the narrations that prohibit chess. Then we go a bit further. They say it's not only about the playing of the game. The riwayat say the tools of chess are tools of gambling that we cannot utilize in our lives. So they say not only is the game prohibited, but the instruments of chess is also prohibited. Why? They say, look at the riwayat. For example, in Wasa'il al-Shia, our 8th Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. He says, al-muttali' fi al-shatranj kal-muttali' fi al-nar. Anyone who looks at the tools of chess is like they're looking at hell. The 6th Holy Imam was asked about the nard, the backgammon, and shatranj. قال لا تقربوهما. Don't even get close to it. So the ulama here, they come forward and say the Ahl al-Bayt are very firm about these narrations. They're saying don't even look at it. I found narrations that says playing chess is like eating pork. Engaging in this game is like eating pork. So when the narrations are so strong and they're not somehow ambiguous, the Maraji', these particular jurists, many of them have come forward and said there is no scope for us to look beyond, even if it's not used for gambling, even if it's used for intellectual advancement, for the brain's development. The riwayat are firm and very strong in saying that this is not instruments that should be even touched or played with. At the same time, we have riwayat that says that shatranj in itself, whatever is associated with it in itself is haram. And they have understood that regardless of gambling that takes place on it or not, it's not permissible because it is what utilized or given as a tool of shaitan. Now, there are today a few of the jurists who have said that playing chess is permissible. Ayatullah Imam Sayyid Ruhullah al-Khumaini rahmatullahi alayh, Ayatullah Sayyid Ali Khamenei hafidhahullah, and Ayatullah Nasir Makarim Shirazi hafidhahullah. They are of the opinion that it is permissible to play chess. What is their background in terms of the deduction of this? How did they come to this? Remember we discussed the mawdu', the subject. There needs to be the look at the subject. The subject here that they look at is the gambling. Is gambling the main purpose of this game or not? Now, when they look at this, they say the following. They say if there's gambling involved, then it's haram. So all the fuqaha, all the maraji' are unanimous in saying when there is a game of chess and there is gambling, it's not permissible. However, they say, if in the area that an individual resides and the country that they live in, the game is no longer considered a game of chance and whereby gambling is taking place and it's now a sport, then it is permissible. It's not whether you think it is. It's where you live and the society has accepted it that way. So some people have even misunderstood the fatwas. They think, oh, if I consider it to be good for my brain development, I will play it. No. The ruling is by these ulama is no. If in the society that you reside in, it is no longer considered a game of qimar, maysir, gambling, then it is indeed permissible for their muqallideen only. For those who follow those maraja specifically. And that's why there is an important area here that must be considered. And that is what? And that is, how do I deal with this? When I come now, and I love to play chess. Some of our youth have said to me, they absolutely admire. They wish they can play it, but they are muqallid. So for example, Ayatollah Wahid Khurasani. Or muqallid, for example, of Ayatollah Khoi. Or muqallid of Ayatollah Sistani. Where there is no scope to turn to another marja' and he has said it's haram. How do I deal with this? What do I do? How do I navigate this challenge in my life? The first thing is, we must recognize the Quranic ethos with regards to the belief in the unseen. الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. Please understand this so that it gives us strength. Because too many times today there is a movement towards simplification of Islamic practice at the expense of God's law. Yes, if it's simplification by the maraja and the experts, no problem. But there are people today who are giving rulings based on the idea of simplifying things for others, not based on concrete evidence. This is not good enough. In the recognition is, I need to live my life in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me to, so that I attain His reward. Do you agree? Now, when I face something that I don't agree with, or I find it difficult to accept, the first thing I must remind myself is, Quran has said the number one quality of a muttaqi is salah. Do you agree? No. The number one quality of somebody who has taqwa is fasting. No. Is hajj. No. Hudan lil muttaqeen alladhina yu'minuna bil ghayb. They believe in the unseen. That means if I come across a ruling that I don't fathom and I can't digest, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. I am not able to accept it, but I must embrace it because it's part of the unseen. Allah knows best. Allah knows best why there are so many narrations saying chess is not the way to go for the believers who follow these majority of scholars who have said it is not permissible. Number one. Number two, Quran in chapter 4 verse 65 highlights to us how should we deal in this situation. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. فَلَا وَرَبِّكَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Well, Allah says, by God, they are not believers. They are not believers. You don't call yourself mu'min. حَتَّى يُحَكِّمُوكَ فِي مَا شَجَرَ بَيْنَهُم. Until they come and see you, Rasulullah, as the arbiter. ثُمَّ لَا يَجِدُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَرَجًا مِمَّا قَضَيْتَ. When you give a ruling, they don't find it difficult to accept what you have said. وَيُسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا. And they submit entirely. Allah says, dig deep in your heart. You call yourself a believer. Until you submit, you're not a believer. Harsh words. Quran says it, not me. When there is something Quran says the Prophet has ruled, you don't have a choice. In chapter 33 verse number 36, these two ayat are very important to keep in mind because it's a struggle, no doubt. It's a huge struggle. These two are important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا كَانَ لِمُؤْمِنٍ وَلَا مُؤْمِنَ إِذَا قَضَى اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ أَمْرًا أَنْ يَكُونَ لَهُمُ الْخِيَرَةُ مِنْ أَمْرِهِمْ. It is not for believing men and women when Allah and His Messenger have said something that they have an option or a choice. Do you want it as clearer than this? This is as clear as the sun. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala says, you and I don't have a choice when it comes to Islamic rulings. Why? Because you might ask me, is there a role for intellect? Can the aql derive Islamic law? It's a very restricted role in the extrapolation of Islamic law. For example, fuqaha come forward and say, when can we use aql? We can use aql in things that are universally agreed to be right and wrong. For example, adl and oppression. For example, today we don't have any riwayat or before that ayat that say the law of the land should be respected. But the maraja say that's the ruling. Why? Because when a country has allowed you to live in it, you should respect the law of its land. Where did this ruling come from? Intellect. But who uses the intellect to derive law? Not you and I, the experts. Because the problem is, when I now begin to take the aql and start applying it into my own life regarding ahkam, this is not a call to suspend the intellect. Intellect has a huge role in the school of Ahl al-Bayt. Aqeedah, huge role, no doubt. How many times you have come across evidence given by those who use the intellect to provide the superiority of Amir al-Mu'mineen? I remember one of the brothers said that I was in Makkah al-Mukarramah and I was in this bookshop and I went inside to look at the books. All of a sudden I found myself next to the books detailing the Fada'il of the Ahl al-Bayt. And the owner of the bookshop came to me and said, it was empty, no one was there. So he started to have a conversation with me and said, why are you just focused on these books about the family of the Prophet? You must be one of the Rawafid, one of the Shia. He said, yes, I am, and I'm proud of it. He said, you know what the problem with you guys are? He said, what is it? He said, you exaggerate everything. What do you mean? He says, you know, the day of Ghadir is a day of friendship of Ali with the Prophet and everyone else. You hold it as a greatest Eid and you celebrate and you do all kinds of things. Doesn't make sense. Why would you celebrate someone being declared as a friend? This Shia looks at him and says, I'm happy to debate you and show you evidence that it's not a day of a declaration of friendship, but much more. And I can convince you, and I'm confident that I can convince you from your own works. He said, excellent, let's do that. When and where? He said, now. I said, what do you mean? He said, let's sit somewhere, right? And I'll provide you with the evidence, and then you can decide yourself from your own works. He said, I can't. He said, why? He said, we can't sit in the book shop. We need to go somewhere, yes? Because otherwise I will be distracted and I can't serve customers. And I don't have a place to go. And I don't have someone to look after this bookshop so that I can go. The Shia looks at him and says, you have a bookshop with a few hundred books. You're not willing to leave it without making sure someone looks after it. And you expect Allah and His Messenger to leave the religion of Islam without leaving a successor? How much aql and intellect can be used to provide evidence of wilayah and imamah? Yes. But in the realm of jurisprudence, it's limited. It's very limited. For you and I to understand this is of the utmost importance. And that's why when we come to Karbala, what do we realize? We realize if we want to be Husseini in the path of Aba Abdullah, in the path of these great individuals, we need to grasp this concept. This concept that is what? That is submission to the will and the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This taslim is empowering. This taslim is beautiful. This taslim is rewarding from Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. If I'm struggling with an Islamic law, if my child is struggling, one of the reasons why they're struggling is perhaps they haven't understood the whole ethos. Who claims that every Islamic law is logically explained? Who can say that? Who can actually come forward and say that there is an intellectual reasoning behind? Yes, there is, but Allah may have not given it to us. I may not be able to derive that from my own aql. I always use this example that when it comes to females missing their prayers and their fasts, at least for example sometimes 7 days a month because of their cycle, when they finish and they're clean, what do they have to do? They have to make up their prayers or they make up their fasts? They make up their? Brothers are no idea. They have to make up their fasts. They don't have to make up their prayers. But which is more important, we're told? Salah. Salah comes first. Salah is the first thing you and I will be asked on the day of Qiyamah. Hold on. This doesn't make any sense. Does it? How is it that Allah has made the making up of the fast wajib and not making up of the Salah? Once I said this to certain sisters, they said, we have the answer. I said, what is it? They said, Allah is kind on us. I said, that's your own conclusion. Where's the evidence for it? In the recognition that we have to be careful, in the footsteps of these individuals, I ask you, when you read history of Karbala and Ashura, do you ever come across anybody who objected to Abu Abdullah? Do you ever come across anyone who said to him, Yabna Rasulullah, I think this is a terrible idea. You shouldn't have come, or you shouldn't have said this, or maybe we should do this or that. The moment Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam left Mecca, those with him were the embodiments of taslim and submission to the commands of Allah through the vicegerent of Allah. That's where they were. Yes, in Medina and Mecca, Imam was told by certain individuals, don't go, change your direction, do this, do that, based on their love for the Ahl al-Bayt. But those individuals who surrounded themselves with the magnificent personality of Hussein and his Ahl al-Bayt were absolutely crystal clear on their path in this world. When Ali Muhammad say something, I am nobody. I am nobody. Who am I to challenge what Abu Abdullah says? Who am I to challenge what Ja'far al-Sadiq says? Who am I to challenge what Rasulullah says? That's indeed something that gives me this pride and honor. I am Muhammadi, I am Ja'fari, I am Alawi. That is who I am. And in order to be of that particular meritorious status, I need to be an individual who rises to that occasion, not picks and chooses. When I like, I follow Amir al-Mu'mineen. On his 30th of Rajab, I will celebrate. Eid al-Qadir, I will celebrate. 21st Ramadan, yes, I'll go ziyarah. But when he says something, oh no, ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I'm not very comfortable with this. Khuda Hafiz. Is this how I deal with my religion? Is this how I deal with the teachings? And that's why Karbala is a school that teaches you and I this beauty of being subservient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Each and every one of them were of this caliber, this category. For example, you have the Sahaba, these individuals who gave their lives, but also you have the family of Abu Abdullah. Each and every one of them, these particular individuals, they had in their hearts strong determination to stand for the truth and to defend their religion. And they were brilliant role models and exemplars for you and I, each and every one of them. I ask you, some of them on the plains of Karbala reminded mankind of the bravery of certain people. And when you look at the two young men, Awn and Muhammad, narrations say people saw them in the battlefield and it reminded them of Ali ibn Abi Talib. The courage of Ali, the strength of Ali, the determination of Ali. That's why on the day of Ashura, when they stood before Abu Abdullah al-Hussain, when they asked for permission to go and fight, when they wanted to sacrifice their lives for the sake of Allah, it was not easy for Abu Abdullah to give permission. Except for Ali and al-Akbar, each and every individual Imam would say, maybe it's not the time, maybe you should go back. But of course, eventually, because they were persistent, Imam gives them the permission to fight. None of them would go to fight without Imam's permission, isn't it? They are subservient, they are submissive to the command of the representatives of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Awn and Muhammad, these brave individuals, these sons of Zainab and Ali, when they went to the battlefield, riwayat tell us that they were close next to each other, seeking each other's protection, looking to defend each other. The love and the brotherhood between them was tremendous and immense. They would fight like true warriors. They would fight like those who were truly in love with Allah and the representative of Allah. You know, it is said that once they were fighting, they were struck, but they had not yet fallen onto the ground. One riwayah says, one of them turns towards the campsite of Abu Abdullah and says the following. He says, Amma, Ya Abu Abdullah, alayka minni salam. I send my salam to you, but please tell my mother Zainab I did not drink a single drop of water. I did not drink any water. This is what one of them wanted Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam to get the message across. Indeed, when they were fighting so bravely, imagine what was going through their mind. A combination of courage, eagerness to attain shahada, but no doubt sadness that they'll have to part with their mother Zainab al-Kubra, with their uncle Abu Abdullah, their uncle Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. All this is probably going through their mind. The poet puts this beautifully. He says, Awn and Muhammad, while striking with their swords, probably have a conversation between themselves. Can you imagine them saying to each other, one of them saying, Oh Awn, who will defend my mother Zainab after us? Oh Awn, I am worried that my mother Zainab would be harmed, would be hurt. Muhammad says, my heart bleeds for my mother Zainab. I wish I'm there to defend her and to do something for her. But we say to them, O Aun and Muhammad, when you collapsed and when you attained Shahada, you collapsed on the ground, but the heart of your mother also collapsed. The heart of your mother Zainab also broke down. There is no doubt that when you remember the musibah of Sayyida Zainab and Aun and Muhammad, this musibah, every mother out there, every individual who has children, who has sons, cannot bear to see the bodies of their own sons in front of them. Imagine Zainab being presented with the bodies of Aun and Muhammad, looking at the bodies of Aun on one side and the body of Muhammad on another. The poet describes this beautiful sight of sacrifice. It's as if I can imagine Zainab saying, Oh Aun, oh Muhammad, why did I not bid farewell properly to you? But now I see that you've left this world. Oh Aun, oh Muhammad, as your mother, my heart is burning for you. But I will keep my tears and I will hold back from crying for you. Oh Aun, oh Muhammad, you have made me proud before my mother Fatima Zahra. But there is a great, void in the heart of Zainab, isn't it? There's a great sense of loss in her heart, which is probably something in her mind as she goes from one city to another, from one calamity to another, from one musibah to another. The riwayat says one of the things she did when she came to Medina was she went to the hidden grave of her mother Fatima Zahra. When she sat next to the grave of her mother Fatima, she began to cry. Can you imagine? This is the moment now where Zainab is speaking to Sayyida. She is now telling her what happened in Karbala. She is now relating the musibah of what she went through. It's as if she says, Mother Fatima ya Zahra, Wallah, the pain of Aun and Muhammad was too deep for me. They are my apples, the apples of my eyes, and they are whom I was proud. Oh, Mother Fatima, Wallah, I felt that moment the same when you felt when you lost your son Muhsin. Allah. Now Zainab is remembering the musibah of Fatima Zahra. When you lost your baby, I now lost my children. My mother Fatima Zahra. It was not only Aun and Muhammad, but it was also Asghar that we lost on Karbala. My pain of Aun and Muhammad was still fresh when Abu Abdullah gave me the body of Asghar with an arrow on his throat. Oh mother Fatima, they trampled on the body of Abu Abdullah. Oh mother Fatima, they did not allow me to bury my sons. Allah, how difficult it was for Zainab. That moment sitting in that room, shedding the tears, looking at the empty beds of her sons that were no longer there. She looks towards the shrine of Rasulullah. Ya Jadda Allah, Ya Rasulallah. Oh my grandfather, Ya Messenger of Allah. When you were there, they looked after us. But shall I tell you of the musibas that I have seen? One individual would say, Zainab saw her mother leave this world. She saw Amir al-Mu'mineen dripping with the blood on his face. Can you imagine that pain in the heart of Zainab when Imam al-Hussain alayhi salam would present her with the bodies of Aun and Muhammad? Perhaps what was going through the heart of Imam was he remembered that sight when in Kufa. What happened in Kufa when Amir al-Mu'mineen was being moved slowly from masjid towards the house? His head was dripping with blood. He stood in front of the house and said to Imams, he said, "Oh Hassan and Hussein, let me enter without you helping me." They said, "Why? Oh father, you're not in a state." He says, "I don't want to break the heart of Zainab." Allahu Akbar. I don't want Zainab's heart to break. Zainab would say, "Ya Rasulallah, they broke my heart so many times in Karbala, but my heart was shattered into pieces when I saw Shimir walk towards Hussein." Ya Hussein.
شبیر کا تم صدقہ اب خیمے میں بیٹا، تم لوٹ کر نہ آنا، اے اون محمد، اے اون محمد۔ ہے ماں کو یقین تم ماں کی بات رکھو گے، یہ یاد رہے خیموں میں ہے پیاسے بچے، دریا پہ اگر جانا ہو سہروز کے پیاسو، تم پیاس نہ بجھانا، اے اون محمد، اے اون محمد، اے اون محمد، اے اون محمد۔ ہر حال پہ تم پر لازم ہے شکر خدا کا، اے شہزادو صبر تمہارا ورثہ، فرزند ہو تم زینب کے شکوہ نہیں کرنا، جب زخم کوئی کھانا، اے اون محمد، اے اون محمد، کب ہم پہ ستم کرنے کے لیے آئے ہیں، یہ بدر و احد کے بدلے کے لیے آئے ہیں، لازم ہے رجز سے پہلے میدان میں تم پر مدح علی سنانا، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، یا حسین 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 یا حسین، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، جواب، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، ہے ماں کو یقین تم ماں کی بات رکھو گے، یہ یاد رہے خیموں میں پیاسے بچے، دریا پہ اگر جانا ہو سے روز کے پیاسو، تم پیاس نہ بجھانا، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، ہر حال پہ تم پر لازم ہے شکر خدا کا، اے شہزادو ہے صبر تمہارا ورثہ، فرزند ہو تم زینب کے شکوہ نہیں کرنا، جب زخم کوئی کھانا، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، کب ہم پہ ستم کرنے کے لیے آئے ہیں، یہ بدر و احد کے بدلے کے لیے آئے ہیں، لازم ہے رجز سے پہلے میدان میں تم پر مدح علی سنانا، اے آن محمد، 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 جب سانس تمہاری بچوں ہو اترنے والی، اس وقت سرانے آئے گی مادر میری، دل کی یہ میری خواہش ہے، اس دم میری ماں سے زخموں تو تم دکھانا، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، اے آن محمد، اے آن دل پہ کرم نانا کی طرح کر دینا، یوں لاج میرے بائی کے نام کی رکھنا، جو واسطہ دے بائی کا میدان پہ اس پر تم تیگ نہ چلانا، اے مولا محمد، 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 اے مولا محمد۔ جب لاش اٹھا کر خیمے میں لائے سرور، زینب یہ بولی اشکوں کو اپنے چھپا کر، میں بھی نہ تمہیں روؤں گی اور میرے لیے بھی آنسو نہ تم بہانا، اے مولا محمد، 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 تعظیم کی خاطر کیوں اٹھتے نبی اب بیٹا، دیکھو تو سرانے آئے ہیں میرے بھیا، جاگو میرے شہزادو کیا بھول گئے ہو قدموں پہ سر جھکانا، اے مولا محمد، 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 اے مولا محمد۔ شاباش میرے بچوں ہوں میں تم سے راضی، یہ کہہ کے تکلم خاموش ہوئی شہزادی، نیزوں پہ سفر کر کے ہمراہ میں آری، تم کو ہے شام جانا، اے مولا محمد، اے مولا محمد، اے مولا محمد، اے مولا محمد، اے مولا محمد،
یا حسین 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 حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین۔
ہمارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے، سقائے سکینہ، مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے، سقائے سکینہ، مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے، سقائے سکینہ، مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے، سقائے سکینہ۔ جو نازیں اٹھاتا تھا وہ سو گیا دریا پر، جو نازیں اٹھاتا تھا وہ سو گیا دریا پر، اب سوکھی زباں کس کو دکھلائے سکینہ ہے، سقائے سکینہ، مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے، سقائے سکینہ، مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ پانی نہیں آئے گا امو نہیں آئیں گے پانی نہیں آئے گا امو نہیں آئیں گے بچوں کو بھلا کیسے سمجھائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ تم ثانی حیدر تھے زینب کا سہارا تھے تم ثانی حیدر تھے زینب کا سہارا تھے عباس کہا تم کو اب پائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ ہاتھوں کو تیرا سقا کیوں کہ نہیں کٹواتا ہاتھوں کو تیرا سقا کیوں کہ نہیں کٹواتا جب مشک ہی تیروں سے چھد جائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ اموں کی خبر سن کے غش آ گیا بی بی کو اموں کی خبر سن کے غش آ گیا بی بی کو ایسا نہ ہو اس غم میں مر جائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ آیا ہے علم خون میں ڈوبا ہوا خیمے میں آیا ہے علم خون میں ڈوبا ہوا خیمے میں ہے امو تیرے دریا سے نہ آئے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ روداد غم غازی کیوں کہنا رضا لکھے روداد غم غازی کیوں کہنا رضا لکھے کاظم کو بھی نوحہ جو پڑھوائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ مارا گیا دریا پر سقائے سکینہ ہے سقائے سکینہ اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں اما فضا مل کے بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں کیسا ہے یہ چراغ دل ڈوبے جا رہے ہیں کیا شام آ گیا ہے اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں ہونے لگی اذانیں کیسے سروں کو ڈھانپے بازو بندھے ہوئے ہیں خون رو رہی ہے آنکھیں آنکھوں کے خون سے رستے خون میں نہا رہے ہیں کیا شام آ گیا ہے اما فضا ہے بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں اتنا چلے ہے پیدل کانٹوں پہ سارے قیدی تھک جاتی چلتے چلتے ہے چلتی اگر زمیں بھی پیروں کے آبلے بھی آنسو بہا رہے ہیں کیا شام آ گیا ہے اما فضا ہے بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں نیزے پہ رو رہا ہے مشکل کشا کا بیٹا نامحرموں کے لب پر ہے آیا ہے نام میرا مجھ کو کنیز زادے یوں بھی رلا رہے ہیں کیا شام آ گیا ہے اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں نیزوں پہ جتنے سر ہے ایک سر ہے ان میں ایسا آنکھیں ہے بند اس کی ہے اور خاک پر ہے گرتا عباس کا یہ سر ہے تیور بتا رہے ہیں کیا شام آ گیا ہے اما فضا ہے بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں ماں کے گودیوں سے لپٹے ہوئے ہیں بچے ہے ہاتھ رسیوں میں ہے ماں کے ایسے جکڑے بچے جو گر رہے ہیں وہ مرتے جا رہے ہیں کیا شام آ گیا ہے اما فضا ہے بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں. ریحان قیدیوں میں برپا تھا شور گریا, پلکوں سے کر رہی تھی ہے ماتم جو بنت زہرا. سجاد نوحہ خواہ ہے, نوحہ سنا رہے ہیں, کیا شام آ گیا ہے. اما فضا ہے بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں. اما فضا بتا دے مجھ کو پتھر کیوں آ رہے ہیں. وہ عابد بیمار تھا, وہ عابد بیمار تھا, چلنے سے جو لاچار تھا, چلنے سے جو لاچار تھا. اور شام کا بازار تھا, اور شام کا بازار تھا, اور مصطفیٰ کی بیٹیاں مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین, مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین, یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین. شبیر کی وہ لاڈلی, شبیر کی وہ لاڈلی, سینے پہ جو شاہ کے پلی, سینے پہ جو شاہ کے پلی, اور جس کی ابا بن میں جلی, جس کی ابا بن میں جلی, منہ پر تماچوں کے نشان, مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین, مولا حق امام یا حسن یا حسین, یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین.